Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be looking at a completely fascinating, deeply powerful narrative today. It's from a scientist who literally breaks down exactly what happens in the human brain during a crisis of faith. We're talking about this incredible tension between a profoundly personal, emotional journey on one side and objective, cold hard neuroscience on the other. To really get a grip on this, I'm going to walk you through her story using her own first-person perspective. As you'll see, it reveals why walking away from a core belief system doesn't just feel like you've changed your mind. No, it physically feels like dying.
So, the story kicks off with a memory. Just picture this. You're 7, maybe 8 years old. You're a kid, naturally curious, and you ask your mom a quote-unquote controversial question about religion. She hesitates, right? And then she drops this chilling directive. Stop questioning God and fear hell. In that exact split second, that kid's brain is not receiving a theological answer. It's learning a strict biological rule. The amygdala, our brain's fear center, is instantly being trained to associate a simple, curious question with a mortal threat. Suddenly, curiosity literally equals danger.
Because, honestly, the true protagonist of this whole story is the brain itself. A healthy human brain naturally seeks fairness, logic, patterns. It desperately wants to figure out the world. But when that healthy organ is suddenly and intensely slammed with the concept of eternal punishment, it gets fundamentally rewired. It completely stops seeking patterns out of wonder, and it just starts seeking safety out of sheer terror.
Part 1. The Science of Early Indoctrination, Conditioning the Developing Brain. Okay, let's dive into this. There's actually a very specific neurological reason why rigid belief systems historically target the young. It all comes down to brain development and which parts of it are vulnerable at what times. So during childhood, the amygdala and the hippocampus are highly plastic. They are actively, rapidly encoding every little piece of information about what's safe and what's dangerous around them. Now here's the crucial biological mismatch. The prefrontal cortex, that analytical, rational part of your brain that actually evaluates if a threat is real, well, that doesn't fully develop until you're around 25 years old, which means a terrifying warning about hellfire completely bypasses any critical thinking. It carves out this deep fear pathway way before the kid even has the cognitive tools to defend against it.
And once that initial seed of fear is planted, the environment just constantly reinforces it. Every single repetition. Daily prayers, recitations, automatic phrases like Alhamdulillah, they are actively strengthening these exact neural circuits. The brain does this thing called myelination, where it literally wraps these circuits in a fatty insulation. And that speeds up those biological signals up to 100 times faster. So after 20 years of this, complex religious belief is no longer just some abstract philosophy. It's an inescapable, physical, automatic reflex. It built an absolute biological superhighway.
Part 2. When Fear Overrides Facts, the Amygdala Hijack.
Now what's really interesting about this next part is what happens when we fast forward to our scientist's 20s. She's studying, researching, and suddenly she spots unmistakable scientific errors in Quranic embryology. And this wasn't just some vague interpretation issue. The facts were simply wrong. But instead of this quiet aha moment of realization, she actually found herself collapsed on a prayer rug, sobbing uncontrollably, begging forgiveness for having satanic thoughts. Why? Well, if we look at the exact path of that panic, it makes total sense. When she read that contrary evidence, her brain didn't route the information to the logical frontal lobe for nice, calm analysis. No way. The deeply conditioned fear center intercepted it immediately. Her brain treated a factual textbook exactly as if she had just stepped right in front of a hungry predator.
This is what's called an amygdala hijack. That perceived moral threat of hellfire entirely suppressed her rational prefrontal cortex. Her body was just flooded with real physical cortisol and adrenaline. The panic wasn't metaphorical, guys. It was a full-blown physiological crisis. So in that moment, collapsing on the rug to pray, that wasn't a spiritual awakening. It was a desperate biological attempt to self-medicate, to use those familiar repetitive rituals just to calm down her screaming amygdala.
Part 3. Living with Two Brains, the Neuroscience of Double Identity. And this brilliantly illustrates the aftermath. Even though the amygdala won that specific night, the prefrontal cortex had still seen the facts. And, well, you can't unsee the truth, right? This kicked off a period of agonizing psychological torment. She described it as feeling exactly like having dissociative identity disorder, just violently torn between two completely different versions of herself. She was essentially running two totally incompatible operating systems. Network A was her automatic, safe, Islamic identity, rooted in the basal ganglia, driven by habit, comfort, and fear. Meanwhile, Network B was her newer, terrifyingly true rational identity, centered in the prefrontal cortex and based entirely on cold, hard evidence.
and her environment literally dictated which operating system booted up. Stepping into the mosque, bam, network A takes charge. Walking into the science lab, network B takes over.
Part 4. Why leaving feels like dying. The collapse.
Eventually, the tension just breaks. But the moment she finally admitted she could no longer stand behind the religion, it wasn't this joyful cinematic scene of liberation. It was devastating. It felt, quite literally, like burning in ashes. Because just think about what is instantly lost here. Absolute certainty about the very nature of reality. A deeply ingrained identity. A protective community. The entire roadmap for life, death, and eternity. All of it just turned to ash in a matter of seconds. And neuropsychologically speaking, something really was dying.
So the crucial point is understanding the default mode network, or DMN. This is the brain system responsible for maintaining your coherent sense of who you are, and it simply could not integrate these two wildly contradictory identities anymore. So when that old foundational neural architecture finally burned to the ground, the DMN didn't just register this as a change of opinion, it registered this massive dissolution of identity as a fatal event.
And the grief that followed that collapse was intensely physical. I mean, when a core belief system collapses, your dopamine levels literally crash. Research shows that this kind of severe bereavement reactivates regions like the subgenual anterior cingulate cortex and the amygdala, meaning the brain processes the loss of an old self in the exact same biological way it processes the literal death of a loved one. This intense mourning isn't just in your head. Well, I mean, it is, but it's a highly measurable physiological reality.
Part 5. Rewiring the brain, from terror to peace.
But here's the good news. Brains are remarkably resilient. Fast forward to the present day, thanks to a phenomenon called neuroplasticity, that overwhelming terror eventually subsided. Today, when former community members threaten our scientists with eternal hellfire, it doesn't trigger a massive panic attack. Honestly, it barely evokes a bored yawn. Her brain has completely rewired itself. She pulled this off by stepping out of those ashes and into the light, transforming all that profound pain into actual purpose. By actively writing and speaking out about her experiences, she basically forced her brain to retrieve those terrifying old memories, but this time to process them within a brand new, completely safe context.
In neuroscience, we call this memory reconsolidation. It's basically the process of updating the emotional payload attached to a specific memory without actually erasing the memory itself. So through her writing and advocacy, her amygdala finally caught up to what her prefrontal cortex had already known for years. The fear of hell wasn't an objective reality. It was simply a learned artificial control mechanism.
Let's move to the next step and see how this all builds into the full process of fear extinction. First off, you have repeated exposure to the fear stimuli, like hearing the threat of hell, without any actual harm happening. Second, the brain automatically updates its biological model of reality. Third, following basic Hebbian principles of synaptic plasticity, those old, unused neural pathways of fear literally begin to physically atrophy from disuse. They just fade away. And finally, the new evidence-based neural pathways strengthen. The weaker the fear got, the louder she spoke until her brain was finally working for her instead of against her.
The author leaves us with this deeply empathetic message for anyone currently going through this kind of fragmentation, anyone whose brain is actively punishing them for just asking questions. Your doubt isn't a disease. It's your brain fighting to be free. It's a biological recovery process. Yes, it's going to feel like burning, and yes, for sure, you will grieve the loss of your old self. But neuroplasticity is real. The pathways will reorganize, the fear will absolutely extinguish, and your brain will heal. It's such a powerful testament to the biology of belief and just the sheer resilience of the human mind. And it leaves all of us with a profound question to reflect on, no matter what our background is. Take a look at your own automatic behaviors, your own unshakable certainties. What highly myelinated pathways are secretly driving your daily choices right now? Are they actually choices you've made, or just reflexes you were taught? Thanks so much for exploring this fascinating intersection of neuroscience and human experience with me.